Eugene A. Znosko-Borovsky has written the following recommendable endgame book, How to Play Chess Endings. It was first published in English in 1940, but this is a later edition and it was published on Dover in 1974. The reason I'm strongly recommending this book is because Znosko-Borovsky, who was a great Russian teacher, explains what, to his mind, chess endings are, and also what you should think about, especially principles. Some things you should know about Eugene Znosko-Borovsky is that he was born in St. Petersburg on 16th of August 1884, and he died in Paris in 1954, 70 years later, as the date was 30th of December. So he was approximately 70 and a half years old. But approximately after the Russian Revolution, he lived in Paris the rest of his life. So there are books by him in the Russian language. For example, one book from 1910 about the evolution in chess. And there are also other books in French. He has written books about Capablanca and the Monsieur Gambit. He has also written a book prior to the World Championship match 1927 between Capablanca and Alekhine. So, this book was published in 1940. However, before I discuss the endgame book in detail, you should know that the middle game in chess was published in 1938. I have already done a short clip about this highly recommendable book about the middle game. And the year after, this book was published in English in 1939, How to Play the Chess Openings. All these books are strongly recommendable. In 1959, two books were published, How Not to Play Chess, and this is probably his most famous book, and The Art of Chess Combination. I will discuss this book in a later clip, but not today. So today we will focus on how to play chess endings in the perspective of Znosko-Borovsky. He was not only a great teacher, he was very well educated, and he wrote articles about music, theater, literature. He wrote reviews in magazines. So his mind was very broad. He was not only focused on chess, he was very much connected to British chess life. For example, in the late 1926, from October and onwards, he regularly visited England, different cities, to give lectures, simultaneous exhibitions, and play in tournaments. And his visit was so popular in 1926 that they invited him again in 1927. And he also visited England in 1930 and 1932. So I guess this is the reason there is a lot of information about him in English, but a lot that is only published in the Russian or the French language is unfortunately not translated. But we have at least 5 English books, and this will be the main focus today. But before I talk more about the book in detail, it's useful to know his abilities as a chess player. He was of the opinion that not everyone deserved to become a grandmaster. So according to him, players such as Capablanca, Lasker, Tarrasch, Rubinstein, and to a certain extent Marshall, he considered grandmasters. He himself was around master level, so he was a very good chess player, but he's mostly famous for his authorships of different chess books. And he played the great players. For example, he beat Capablanca in one game, and he could also beat Alekhine in lightning chess. But normally he lost to Alekhine. They met 9 times, and he lost 6 games and drew 3. I'm going to show you on the screen how he could play against Alekhine, because especially one of his games are useful to know, and Alekhine has written about it himself in one of his biographies. Here we can see the famous endgame between Znosko-Borovsky and Alekhine, and it appeared in a tournament game that was played in Paris, 1933. And you can see here that there are even annotations in the French language. So this game is from ChessBase collection. And yeah, the last move was Rook take d8, and Alekhine won this game very convincingly. And I recommend you to read Alekhine's comments about this endgame. It taught me a great deal. I should mention to you, if you put on the computer here, it will say that the position is about equal, with a slight initiative to black. So, yeah, we will look at this in a minute. But he's also famous for this game, because here Alekhine made a mistake. It happened in this position. In this position, Alekhine played knight c2 to secure the win of an exchange, but that was not the best move. And many annotators, including Znosko-Borovsky and Alekhine himself, has written that the best continuation would have been to play knight d3 check. But this move was missed by Tartakover and Demont, who annotated this game in their book 500 Master Games. And the reason this move is so good is that obviously White cannot move the king here, because then he will have serious problems with his development. So this is the move. And if White now makes the natural move, casting on the king's side, White's queen will be trapped in the corner. Because as you can see, after queen d4, the knight on a4 controls the c5 square, so bishop c5 wins the queen. So it was a little bit surprising that Alekhine missed this move, because after this move the game petered out in a draw. because now white could block the D file with tempo. And here, Znosko-Borovsky missed the even stronger possibility knight b5, which threatens to block both the bishop on f8 and the rook on d8. So this move would not be so dangerous anymore after knight d6 check. Anyway, this move worked as well, because the idea is obviously to play bishop b5 check. So Alekhine played the best continuation, and obviously he wants to castle on the king's side, but it's not so easy after the following moves. So the rook on d7 is pinned, and Alekhine has this idea to maneuver the bishop to b5, but after rook takes f7, it will still be a draw. So it's a draw by perpetual. So here we could see a little bit how he played against Alekhine. You can also find a lot of interesting information on internet. I can especially recommend what the British historian Edward Winter has written about him. And here you also can see a picture of him. So we have a lot of information here. For example, that Znosko-Borovsky was of the opinion that a world championship match should have been played between Max Euwe and Mikhail Botvinnik. But as we all know, this never happened, because after the death of Alekhine in 1946, they decided for a world championship tournament in 1948 instead, which Mikhail Botvinnik managed to win and become the new world champion. Yeah, here we can also see not so clear photo of Znosko-Borovsky. Also here it's taken in St. Petersburg, 1909. So there are a lot of pictures on Winter's notes. And here we have one of the books that was never published into the English language. It's a book about the coming match between Capablanca and Alekhine. But at least you can see what games were discussed if you understand the Russian language or translate into a language you understand. And here we have sorry. Here we have a tandem simultaneous displays. We can see Tartakov here and Znosko-Borovsky on the right hand side. There are some really good pictures here. Here we can see yeah, and here he's sitting on the right, Znosko-Borovsky. I should also mention that Znosko-Borovsky had a very exciting life. He was wounded several times because he was a soldier in the war between Russia and Japan, 1905, and he was also wounded in the war, First World War. Yeah, here we have a very clear photo of him taken in Paris. Yeah, here is one funny anecdote. Because he played a simultaneous display and he played E4 on every board. But no, not on every board. One unfortunate white at board number 19, having anxiously witnessed 18 gentle pawn advances on the part of the approaching master, was utterly mesmerized by a sudden, most uncalled for knight f3 on his board. And it was not until Borovsky was halfway round again that he recovered sufficiently to mop his brow and exclaimed to his neighbor in an awe-struck but injured tones, "What on earth has he done it to me for?" So that was a bit odd. Why did he play knight f3 in that one game? Yeah, his chess career was upset by wars and political upheavals. Indeed, his military career did him great honor. Yeah, this is what I already mentioned. But here, the British R.N. Coles has written, and I agree with him completely, perhaps the greatest teacher of elementary chess of all time. Yeah, here he annotated his game against Capablanca. No, that's annotations by Capablanca. Aha, okay, yeah. Yeah, some pictures. Yeah, you can look at this more slowly yourself. Yeah, this I also like. No book on endgames to date has been much more than a collection of abstruse artificialities. So Znosko-Borovsky was a very important publication in these days. So we are, yeah, this was 1939 and this was published in 1940. But I would say that this endgame book is still very important for most of the players on this planet. But even advanced players can benefit from it. What he has written in his book, you will not find elsewhere. Yeah, and this is a very famous story. Shortly after Capablanca became world champion, Znosko-Borovsky published a booklet of the Cubans' losses called Capablanca's Error. Asked about it, Kappa said he hoped to write a book called Znosko-Borovsky's Good Moves. But he said, unfortunately, I did not succeed in finding material for it. This is probably the most famous anecdote connected with Znosko-Borovsky and his meeting with Capablanca. So now I will focus on this book a little bit more in detail. First, I'll explain the main structure in the book. So it starts with an introduction and then with the elements. So I will only mention the main headlines. And the next headline is moves, the men, the king, the pawns, the pieces, the queen, the rook. That is probably the longest part of the book. The bishop and the knight, positional analysis, conceptions and execution of a plan, tactical opportunities, false results, the transition stage between the middle and end game. So this is obviously a very important part of the book. Conclusions and answer to questionnaire. So through the whole book, you will find some exercises which are useful to solve. So I will give you some impressions I have got from the book. I can also show you how thorough I have been with this book. And here you can see more in detail the names, the sub-chapters. You can see my days here. So I read this book a lot in the 90s, especially 92, 93, 94. You can also see here, a little bit closer. And here. And I was a pretty good player during this time. I was actually international master and read this book very thoroughly. Because it's not only a fundamental book, I would say this book is fundamental in an advanced way because it's discussing principles. So, yeah, you can also see next page here. And this book is relatively easy to find. I have not found a new publication. So if you want the first edition, you have to go for the American edition in 1940, or you have this Dover edition from 1974, which is the cheapest one. It costs around $10. Yeah, that was translator's preface. For example, this is a very famous position, the famous study by Reti. But the reason I like this position, of course, I knew this study, but it's the perspective that this study, despite the fact that all the pieces are placed on the flanks, it still shows the importance of the center. Because as we all know, who are familiar with this study, the king must reach the e5 square to get the draw. If you're not familiar with it, you should try to solve it. It's one of the most famous study. And Znosko-Borovsky has written what I have underlined here. This example also shows the importance of the center. You can see here, I have put an exclamation mark. on that. And this is not the only time I have realized that endgame is very much about controlling and understanding the importance of the center. Not only in the opening and middle game, but also the end game, even though you are playing on the flank. So this is a very important wisdom when you play end games. So he begins with pawn endings, and he also discusses corresponding squares. And for example, he calls it related squares. And here you have a typical position. So try to figure this one out. Is white to move and win? And here you have a side opposition because you have 3 squares between the kings. So e5 is related to a5. e6 is related to a6, f6 is related to b6. So the solution here is, yes, pause the video if you want to know the solution. The solution is king f5 because black cannot play king b5 and keep the opposition. So this is a relatively simple example, but you will understand that this book is also for advanced players if I show you this position. And this is the reason I was so interested in this book. So this is not a beginner's book, it's a fundamental book in an advanced way, I would say. And here you have another. There are several positions with this theme of related squares. Here we have it again. And again, as you can see, I put 2 exclamation marks because I was very impressed and interested in this, to study these positions in depth. Yeah, here again, we have one. No, sorry. This is a tactical position, and this is a very famous one. If you haven't seen it, it's black to move and win. Then it talks about the king, and he mentioned that the king is transformed in the end game. Remember, my notes here are from the 90s. If I read this book once more, I would probably underline in a different way. So what I have done is that I have manually checked my underlinings in the book. So for me, this book is also like a notebook because I can write in the book if I don't agree with something or if I'm impressed of something. Here I even got an idea to study. I can mention I have written here because when you study endgames, you start to think about related positions, so to speak, and sometimes you create them yourself. I think that is a real learning when you do not only think about the positions you are trying to understand, but when you start to think about new positions. Yeah, here we have a very interesting pawn endgame. I put 2 exclamation marks on that one. Yeah, and then he discusses the pieces, and he begins with a queen. Queen versus pawn. But here he writes that he thinks that these endings occur very seldom, and that is true, and do not require any special study. And here I have written that I agree that such endgames are rare, but you should not ignore them. I have already mentioned in an early video that you should study and understand the endgame between Botvinnik-Minev that was played in Helsinki Olympia 1952, because in that game Botvinnik the method king to king was introduced in that endgame. You should not play as it is a Lutzina position and put the king in front of the pawn. Here we have a very famous queen endgame with Marocci, with numerous pawns. So if you have this book, you will also have access to classical endgames, which you should know by heart. You should understand them completely. I will show you a couple of such endgames you should know. Yeah, here we have Rook and pawn versus Rook. Yeah, he discusses all it. Yeah, and this is a position I also like very much, because you can see my mark there on the d5 square. Because in this endgame, you must centralize the king. So here, once again, we can see the importance of the center, despite the fact white has a pawn on b3. The rook is already cutting off the enemy king by controlling the e5, but to be able to win this position, you have to maneuver the king to d5. So, for example, if we imagine this variation, king c3, threatening b4, black is forced to check the king, rook c8, then you play king d4, black goes back, rook b8, you play king c4, rook c8, king d5. And if black goes back now to b8, you can just play rook f1 check and then play rook b1. Or if black plays rook d8 check when the king is on d5, king c6. For example, rook b8, rook b4, and king e6. So after king d5, I said rook d8 check, king c6, rook b8, rook b1, king e6, b4, king e7, b6, king d8, rook d1 check. Because on king c8, white just play rook h1, rook takes b4, rook h8 mate. This is a very instructive position. You should study it carefully. So, yeah, a lot of rook endgames, because according to Znosko-Borovsky, that is the most important endgame. And you must really learn how to play rook endgames, because if you don't know how to play, it will be very difficult to find the technique in a real game. Yeah, so here we have this famous example, the last match game between Capablanca Alekhine, and here Alekhine has the white pieces. It's a one rook endgame. So you will learn a lot of rook endgames, and this position made a very strong impression on me, because it was this book that taught me how you can play for a win in this endgame. So the key is to check on the G file and force the king to H1 or F1. Now the rook is standing here, but we can imagine if it's white's move that if you play rook G5 check and white plays king F1, the king is cut off on the G file, and then there is a very good plan that you can play E5, F5, F4, and then just maneuver your king to H3. Or if white plays king H1, the king will be cut off as well. So very useful. I haven't found that in any other endgame book. You can see here how much annotations I have done here regarding this endgame. Yeah, he also analyzes this famous Philidor position. And it's an exercise how to put black in Zugzwang. Minor piece and pawn. Yeah, and this one by Santorini is a very famous bishop ending. Do you know how to win this? Try to figure it out. I will tell you the solution. So, for example, you can play bishop h4 with the idea bishop f2 to a7 to b8. Black has to stop that plan. So after bishop h4, king b5, bishop f2, king a6. But then you play the super move, bishop c5. Double exclamation mark. You must put the bishop on c5. And because otherwise black would play the bishop to d6. Now, for example, if black plays the bishop to g3, you go back by playing bishop e7, king b5, bishop d8, king c6. You cannot play bishop c7, but now you can play bishop h4. And black has to play bishop h2. And after bishop f2, king b5, bishop a7. White is already there. King a6, bishop b8, bishop e8. You can play bishop e3. And after bishop a7, you will win with bishop f2. So I think this is an extraordinary study. It's very useful to know. Yeah, this is actually an endgame where Znosko-Borovsky has the white pieces. Look at the extraordinary knight on d7. This knight is incredible in this game. It's not so often you see such a versatile knight as in this game. Unfortunately, we do not have time in this video to look at it. Yeah, here we have a classical endgame. Chekhov-Lasker, Moscow, 1935. So here the bishop on e5 is stronger than the knight on e2. Notice also that black's king is already on the queen side. Because the rooks will be exchanged, black will play rook c8 here, and after rook takes c8, king takes c8, white's position is actually lost. This is a classical endgame. You should know by heart. Here we have another one between Capablanca, Reshevsky, Nottingham, 1936. The bishop is obviously stronger. The knight is obviously stronger than the bishop, but here black has two weaknesses, the b pawn and the d pawn. So the position is lost. But if black has only one weakness, as here, this is also Moscow, 1935, floor, Capablanca, the position is a draw. But you must follow Capablanca's rule and put the black pawns on black squares. He also has some other classical positions like this one. It's a match between Flor Botvinnik, played in 1933. You can see here white's bishop pair against black's knight pair. The knight on d7 cannot move because of bishop c8, and the b7 pawn is lost. You should study this endgame in detail as well. So it's all in this book. Here you also have a world championship game between Capablanca and Alekhine. So even when black is passive, the bishop pair can be an asset. In this game, Alekhine had no problems to hold the draw, despite the fact that white's knights are situated on strong outposts. Yeah, and this is also a classical endgame. Marshall, Capablanca, the match that was played in 1909. How to exploit a pawn majority on the queen side. And yeah, this is a very interesting position. So in this position, white's queen has problems. So he has to defend against the fork knight f4. So what do you think white should play here? Have a look. The best here would have been to play queen e4 and activate the queen. So here we have centralization again. But instead, white played g3 here. And that was too passive after rook d4. And the queen has no useful square. And after rook d4, white played a3. And then Alekhine find the amazing move rook f4, threatening the pawn on f2. And here white made a mistake again because he played the national move king g2, which failed to rook takes h4. It's an extraordinary, well-played game by Alekhine. It was played in Cascanet, and Yates had the white pieces. Yeah, and this is also classical endgame. Also, Kuto has written about this in his book. Capablanca, Ragushin, Moscow, 1936. Yeah, this is also a classical endgame. Leonard Capablanca, San Sebastian, 1911. Bishop pair against bishop pair. So you can see that this is an extraordinary book. There are so many interesting positions. So only by reading this book you will improve your endgame ability enormously. And I would say that even if you are a pretty advanced player, this book would be useful. And his language is very good. It's a joy to read books by Znosko-Borovsky. I will talk more about his other books in later clips. But for now, we are satisfied with this book, so try to get it before it's difficult to get. And it's a very cheap book. You will not regret it. Don't worry about the descriptive notation. Thank you for watching. My name is Thomas Engqvist, and I am an international master from Sweden. See you next time.